call Mahesh Bundra.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to rise on behalf of New Zealand First to speak to this drug and alcohol testing of community-based offenders and Bailees legislation bill. Mr. Speaker, we have supported the bill through the earlier stages of this legislation, and we supported it because we like the intent of this bill. And the intent of this bill is to hold those offenders and Bailees who are in the communities to account. Those Bailees and offenders and those on parole earlier, Mr. Speaker, before this, this legislation was thought of, used to get away with continuing their offending habits, continuing their addiction with drugs and alcohol. And this bill seeks to remedy that situation. Mr. Speaker, those on bail and other offenders in the community, in the absence of such good and potentially effective legislation, got away with a lot of, got away with their recidivism. So we like this legislation, although it has some anomalies which are yet to be unanswered, which are yet unanswered. We did have some questions which were not answered. However, the overall intent of the bill is good, and that is to keep our communities safer. This bill will go a long way in addressing the reoffending habits of prisoners in the community, the offenders in the communities. So, Mr. Speaker, having been trained as a drug testing officer some years ago, I have a fair bit of idea of how the drug testing regime works inside the wire, inside the prison. That is not perfect, but it is fairly effective. I have seen thousands of prisoners going out and coming back through the prison, our prison's revolving doors. Mr. Speaker, about the regime, the testing regime within the prisons, those tests are carried out within the closed confines of a prison. But still, some prisoners are able to manipulate the results. They are able to falsify the samples. That percentage is not very high, luckily, but there are a few who have managed to falsify their drug results. And the department has no means to stop that unless the officers who collect the samples are very alert and they comply with the rules that are being set down for those tests. And after the, also connected to the drug testing system is the drug treatment units that are being run by corrections. And I would like to congratulate Department of Corrections to be very effective in addressing the drug addiction of prisoners within the wire. Mr. Speaker, this bill will now bring the offenders who are on parole or on bail or on temporary release in line with the prisoners who are in the custody of Department of Corrections. So they will be as responsible for addressing their offending and their drug and alcohol abuse as the prisoners inside the walls of a prison are. So which will I think will be a situation where the prisoners, whether they are in prison, in custody, or they are outside in the community, will be responsible for their behavior. So, Mr. Speaker, other than that, the other issue that we had was about the modalities of how this drug testing regime is going to work. We were told that the Bailees will be administered by the police, and those on parole or on temporary release will be managed as it is by the Department of Corrections. So it will be up to the Commissioner of Police to formulate rules for police, and the Chief Executive of Corrections will be responsible for laying down rules for Department of Corrections. So our sort of fear was that what happens if they do not coordinate with each other. And for that purpose, I had, Mr. Speaker, to fix that anomaly, I had lodged an SOP, which is number 163, proposing that it becomes mandatory for the police commissioner and the chief executive of corrections to talk to each other, to consult each other, while formulating rules for their respective areas of work. However, I think only the Greens saw the wisdom in supporting that SOP, and I thank them for that. And the minister thought that it was not necessary for such an SOP to be supported by the government, because she reckons that the corrections and police do talk to each other. So it is not necessary for this legislation to make it mandatory for them to talk. Mr. Speaker, if that was the case, our question is, what happened when Philip John Smith escaped the country? What happened when Robertson raped and killed Blessy Gotenko? In both these cases, the two departments did not know what the other was doing. It took them about 48 hours to talk about the escape by Philip John Smith. So to fix that situation, the SOP was put through, Mr. Speaker, but wasn't supported by the government. Now, the minister went to the extent of implying that the chief executive of corrections and the commissioner of police share information. They work very well with each other, and therefore there is no such need for a SOP like that. Mr. Speaker, while we support the bill, given the intent behind it, we have some questions that are yet unanswered. So, and those questions are, Mr. Speaker, again about how it is going to work, about the modalities of the drug testing regime. And we want to make sure that the offenders who are on parole are kept in line with the Bailees, so that there is no unfairness in administering this legislation. So overall, it is a good legislation, Mr. Speaker, and we support this bill.